The silk sheets beneath her skin felt like chains, beautiful and suffocating all at once. Evelyn's eyes snapped open to unfamiliar shadows dancing across an ornate ceiling, her heart hammering against her ribs as fragments of memory slipped away like smoke. She couldn't remember how she'd arrived in this opulent prison, couldn't recall the journey that had torn her from everything she'd ever known, but the ache in her chest told her that her old life was gone forever. The room around her whispered of wealth and power, from the hand-carved mahogany furniture to the Persian rugs that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Crystal chandeliers caught the morning light filtering through heavy velvet curtains, casting rainbow fragments across walls lined with leather-bound books that seemed to watch her with knowing silence. Everything was perfect, pristine, and completely wrong. She sat up slowly, her body protesting with unfamiliar soreness, and caught sight of herself in an antique mirror. The woman staring back wore a white silk nightgown that clung to curves she didn't remember being quite so pronounced, and her skin held a luminescence that seemed almost otherworldly. Her long auburn hair fell in waves around her shoulders, framing green eyes that looked too bright, too aware, as if something fundamental had shifted in the depths of her being. The sound of footsteps in the hallway beyond her door made her pulse quicken. Not the heavy boots of guards or the hurried pace of servants, but something else entirely. Something that moved with predatory grace, each step measured and deliberate. The footsteps paused outside her door, and she held her breath, waiting. When the door opened without a knock, without permission, she knew immediately that privacy was a luxury she no longer possessed. The man who entered commanded attention simply by existing, his presence filling the room like a force of nature. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved with the fluid confidence of someone accustomed to absolute authority. His dark hair was styled with casual perfection, and his features could have been carved by a master sculptor, all sharp angles and masculine beauty. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch in her throat. Golden, not hazel or light brown, but pure molten gold that seemed to burn with an inner fire. Those eyes swept over her with an intensity that made her feel both exposed and strangely protected, as if he could see straight through to her soul and found something there worth guarding. "Good morning, Evelyn." His voice was deep and smooth, with an accent she couldn't place. "I trust you slept well." The fact that he knew her name when she could barely remember it herself sent a chill down her spine. She pulled the silk sheet higher, covering herself more completely, and lifted her chin in defiance she didn't entirely feel. "Who are you? Where am I?" A smile played at the corners of his mouth, not cruel, but not entirely kind either. "I am Darius Blackthorn, Alpha of the Shadowmere Pack, and you, my dear, are exactly where you need to be. Alpha." The word resonated through her mind with a significance she couldn't grasp, like a key turning in a lock she didn't know existed. "I don't understand. I don't remember agreeing to come here. I don't remember anything." "Memory is a fragile thing," Darius said, moving closer to the bed with that same predatory grace. "Sometimes it's kinder to let certain recollections fade while new ones take their place. You're safe here, Evelyn. You're home. Home." The word should have brought comfort, but instead it felt like a cage door slamming shut. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, noting absently that someone had cleaned and bandaged small cuts on her feet that she couldn't remember receiving. "This isn't my home. I want to leave." "That's not possible." His golden eyes never left her face, studying her reaction with the focus of a predator watching prey. "Not yet. There are things you need to understand first, responsibilities you need to accept. I don't have any responsibilities to you or anyone else here." The words came out stronger than she felt, powered by a determination that surprised her. "I'm not your prisoner." "No," Darius agreed, his voice softening slightly. "You're not my prisoner. You're something far more precious than that." Before she could ask what he meant, the door opened again, and 3 figures entered. 2 women, and a man, all moving with that same uncanny grace, all possessing an otherworldly beauty that made ordinary humans look like rough sketches next to finished paintings. Their skin held the same subtle luminescence she'd noticed in her own reflection, and their eyes held depths that spoke of ancient knowledge and carefully guarded secrets. "This is Helena," Darius gestured to the first woman, whose silver hair fell like liquid mercury around a face that could have belonged to an ancient goddess. "She'll be your guide and teacher. Beside her is Marcus, my second in command, and Victoria, our pack's healer." Pack. Another word that resonated strangely, triggering instincts she didn't understand. Evelyn found herself studying the way they held themselves, the subtle dynamics of dominance and submission that played out in their posture and positioning. Helena stood with quiet authority, Marcus with watchful protection, and Victoria with nurturing concern, but all deferred to Darius without question. "What kind of pack?" Evelyn asked, though part of her already suspected the answer would shatter what remained of her normal worldview. "We are shapeshifters," Helena said, her voice melodious and patient, "beings blessed with the ability to take wolf form, governed by ancient laws and sacred traditions. And you, dear child, have been chosen to help preserve our bloodline for future generations." The words hit her like a physical blow. Chosen, preserve the bloodline. The implications crashed over her in waves, each one more horrifying than the last. "You're talking about breeding," she said flatly. "You brought me here to be some kind of broodmare. The role of a pack-bearer is sacred and honored," Victoria said gently, stepping forward with her hands clasped in a gesture of peace. "You would want for nothing. Be protected absolutely, and your children would be raised as treasured members of our family." "My children?" Evelyn's voice rose, anger and panic warring for dominance. "I haven't agreed to have children with anyone, let alone with strangers who kidnapped me and stole my memories." "Your memories weren't stolen," Darius said quietly. "They were clouded to ease your transition. The truth of how you came to us would only cause unnecessary pain. Trust that you are here by divine providence, not by force." "Divine providence?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Is that what you call kidnapping now?" "Celestial intervention." Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice rumbling with barely contained power. "You speak of things you don't understand, human. There are forces at work beyond your comprehension, ancient laws that govern the survival of our species." "I understand enough," Evelyn shot back, surprised by her own courage in the face of such overwhelming supernatural presence. "I understand that you've taken my freedom, my memories, and my choice. Nothing you say about divine providence or sacred traditions changes that." The room fell silent, tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Darius studied her with those burning golden eyes, and she had the unsettling feeling that he was seeing far more than she intended to reveal. Finally, he nodded slightly, as if she'd passed some kind of test. "You have spirit," he said approvingly. "That's good. Our children will need strength to survive what's coming. There won't be any children," Evelyn said firmly. "I won't be part of your breeding program, no matter how you dress it up with pretty words and luxury accommodations." "The moon cycles care nothing for your protests," Helena said not unkindly. "Your body is already beginning to change, to adapt to your new purpose. Fighting it will only cause you pain." As if summoned by her words, Evelyn became aware of subtle differences in her physical form. Her senses seemed heightened, colors more vivid, sounds more distinct. She could hear heartbeats in the room, could smell emotions on the air like perfume. Fear, anticipation, desire, and something else, something wild and untamed that called to a part of her she'd never acknowledged. "What have you done to me?" she whispered, touching her throat as if she could feel the changes from the outside. "We've awakened what was always there," Darius said, moving closer until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "The dormant wolf blood that flows in your veins, the heritage you never knew you carried." "That's impossible. I'm human." Completely, totally human. You were raised human, Victoria corrected gently. But your grandmother's grandmother carried the mark of our kind. The bloodline may skip generations, but it never truly dies. The revelation hit her like a physical blow, recontextualizing everything she thought she knew about herself. If there was truth in their words, then she wasn't entirely the victim she'd believed herself to be. She was connected to this world by blood, by ancestry, by a heritage that had been hidden from her until now. Even if that's true, she said, fighting to maintain her composure, it doesn't give you the right to decide my future. I won't be your breeding mare, no matter what blood flows in my veins. The choice may not be yours to make, Marcus said grimly. There are others who would claim you, others whose methods are far less gentle than ours. Alpha Darius offers protection and respect. Not all of our kind would be so accommodating. Are you threatening me? I'm educating you, Marcus replied. The world you've been thrust into operates by different rules. Here, strength determines fate, and those without protection become prey. Darius shot his second, a warning look, then turned back to Evelyn with something approaching gentleness. What Marcus means is that your unique heritage makes you valuable to more than just our pack. There are others who would see you as nothing more than a means to an end, a vessel for powerful offspring with no regard for your well-being. And you're different. How exactly? Because I give you time to understand what you've become before expecting you to embrace it. His golden eyes held hers steadily. Because I offer choice within necessity, freedom within protection. Choice? She laughed bitterly. You've taken my memories, my old life, my freedom to leave. What choice do I have in any of this? The choice to find happiness in your new reality, Helena said softly. The choice to embrace power instead of fighting it. The choice to be a partner rather than a victim. Evelyn looked around the room at these beautiful, powerful beings who spoke of her future as if it belonged to them. Every instinct screamed at her to fight, to rebel, to never surrender the independence that had defined her for so long. But beneath the anger and fear, something else stirred. Something that recognized the truth in their words about her heritage. Something that responded to the wild call she could feel thrumming beneath her skin. How long? She asked quietly. How long for what? Darius asked. How long do I have before you expect me to fulfill this sacred duty of yours? How long before you stop being patient and understanding? The first full moon of your awakening is 3 weeks away, Helena said. By then, your transformation will be complete, and your wolf will seek her mate, whether your human mind approves or not. 3 weeks. 21 days to figure out how to escape, how to reclaim her life, how to fight against a destiny that had been chosen for her by people who claimed to know her better than she knew herself. It wasn't much time, but it would have to be enough. I need to be alone, she said, exhaustion suddenly weighing on her like a physical burden. I need time to process all of this. Of course, Darius said, though his eyes suggested he understood exactly what she was planning. Helena will bring you breakfast and answer any questions you might have. We'll speak again tonight. As the 3 supernatural beings filed out of the room, Darius paused at the doorway. Evelyn, he said softly, I know this seems overwhelming now. I know you feel trapped and angry and afraid. But I want you to know that everything we've done has been to protect you from a fate far worse than anything you'll find here. And what fate is that? Death, he said simply. Or worse, a life of servitude to those who would break your spirit completely before using your body to further their own ambitions. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Evelyn alone with her racing thoughts and the growing awareness that her situation was far more complex than simple kidnapping. If they were telling the truth about her heritage, about the dangers that awaited her in the outside world, then perhaps the cage they'd built around her was less prison than sanctuary. But that didn't mean she had to accept it without a fight. as she moved to the window and gazed out at the forest beyond, noting the subtle shimmer in the air that suggested magical wards and protective barriers. Evelyn began to plan. 3 weeks wasn't long, but it might be enough to find another way, a third option between submission and exile. She just had to survive long enough to discover what that option might be, and pray that her awakening wolf wouldn't betray her human determination when the time came to choose between safety and freedom. The battle for her soul was just beginning, and she intended to win it on her own terms, no matter what the cost. The breakfast Helena brought arrived on a silver tray that probably cost more than Evelyn's entire wardrobe from her previous life. Fresh berries glistened like jewels beside warm pastries that smelled of honey and spices she couldn't identify. The coffee was rich and dark, served in delicate porcelain that felt fragile as butterfly wings between her fingers. Everything was perfect, beautiful, and designed to make her comfortable in her gilded cage. She ate mechanically, her mind racing through possibilities and escape plans, while Helena settled into the chair beside the window with practiced grace. The older woman's silver hair caught the morning light, and her ancient eyes held a patience that spoke of centuries rather than decades. "You have questions," Helena said, not quite making it a question. "Hundreds," Evelyn admitted, setting down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "Starting with how long you've all been planning this." "Planning suggests a level of control we don't possess," Helena replied, her voice soft but firm. "Your arrival was foretold, prophesied by seers generations ago. We've been waiting, not planning. How convenient for you that prophecy happened to align with your breeding program." Helena's laugh was like silver bells, beautiful and haunting. "You speak as if you understand our world, child. Let me tell you what you don't see. Our numbers have been declining for 3 centuries. We're dying out slowly and inexorably because pure bloodlines have been diluted and scattered. Without intervention, we'll be extinct within 100 years. The weight of that revelation settled over Evelyn like a heavy blanket. Extinction wasn't a concept she'd considered, the idea that an entire species could disappear simply because they couldn't produce enough viable offspring. "And you think I'm the answer to that problem?" "Not just you," Helena said, rising to move toward a bookshelf filled with leather-bound volumes. "But you represent hope for the first time in decades. Your bloodline carries genetic markers we haven't seen in living memory, traits that could strengthen our children for generations to come." "My bloodline," Evelyn repeated, testing the words. "You keep talking about this heritage I supposedly carry, but I don't feel any different than I did yesterday. I don't feel like I have wolf blood." Helena pulled a slim volume from the shelf and returned to her seat, opening it to reveal pages covered in delicate illustrations. "Look," she said, turning the book toward Evelyn. The drawings were exquisite, detailed anatomical studies that showed the transformation process from human to wolf form. Each stage was labeled in elegant script, describing the physical and psychological changes that accompanied the shift. But it was the final illustration that made Evelyn's breath catch in her throat. The wolf depicted there was magnificent, with auburn fur that matched her hair color exactly, and green eyes that seemed to stare directly into her soul. The artist had captured something wild and fierce and undeniably feminine in the creature's posture, a pride that radiated from every line of its form. "This is what you'll become," Helena said gently, "what you were always meant to be." "It's just a drawing," Evelyn protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Something deep inside her recognized the creature on the page, responded to it with a longing she didn't want to acknowledge. "Is it?" Helena asked, closing the book and setting it aside. "Then why can you hear my heartbeat right now? Why can you smell the emotions of everyone who's been in this room today? Why do your senses feel sharper, more alive than they ever have before?" Because it was true. All of it. Evelyn could hear not just Helena's steady heartbeat, but the rapid flutter of a bird outside the window, the distant footsteps of people moving through the house below. She could smell fear and hope and desire lingering in the air like invisible clouds, could taste the metallic tang of her own anxiety on her tongue. "The awakening has begun," Helena continued, her voice taking on the cadence of someone reciting ancient knowledge. "Your wolf is stirring, recognizing her true home at last. Fighting it will only cause pain, child. Embracing it will give you power beyond your wildest dreams." "Power to do what?" "Bear children for your alpha." "Power to reshape our world," Helena said, her eyes blazing with sudden intensity. "Do you think we're asking you to be a passive vessel? Do you imagine that the mother of future pack leaders would have no voice in how they're raised, what values they're taught, what kind of society they'll inherit?" The implication hit Evelyn like a thunderbolt. They weren't just asking her to be a breeder. They were offering her the chance to influence the next generation of their kind, to help guide the evolution of an entire species. It was a responsibility that both terrified and intrigued her. "What if I'm not strong enough?" she asked quietly. "What if I fail like the others before me?" Helena's expression softened with something that might have been maternal affection. "The others were chosen for their bloodlines alone. You were chosen for your spirit as well as your heritage. That makes all the difference." Before Evelyn could respond, a commotion outside drew their attention to the window. Below in the courtyard, a group of pack members had gathered in what appeared to be some kind of formal assembly. Men and women of supernatural beauty stood in carefully arranged positions, their posture suggesting a hierarchy she was only beginning to understand. At the center of it all stood Darius, his golden eyes scanning the crowd with the focused intensity of a natural leader. Even from this distance, Evelyn could feel the pull of his presence, the magnetic charisma that made it impossible to look away from him. "What's happening?" she asked, noting the tension in the air even from 3 stories up. "A challenge," Helena said grimly. "Someone is questioning Alpha Darius's decisions regarding your presence here." As if summoned by her words, a tall figure stepped forward from the crowd. Another man of obvious power and authority, his dark hair streaked with premature silver, and his stance radiating barely contained aggression. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly on the morning air. "You endanger us all with this obsession," the challenger declared, his words cutting through the courtyard like a blade. "The human brings nothing but weakness to our bloodline and attention from those who would see us destroyed." "Councillor Thorn speaks out of fear," Darius replied, his own voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Fear of change, fear of growth, fear of the future our seers have promised us. I speak out of wisdom earned through centuries of survival," Thorn shot back. "We've remained hidden, remained strong, by maintaining our purity and our traditions. This human mongrel threatens everything our ancestors died to preserve." The word mongrel hit Evelyn like a slap, even though she barely understood the context in which it was being used. The contempt in Thorn's voice was unmistakable, the dismissive way he referred to her heritage as if she were some kind of contamination. "Watch your tongue, Counselor," Darius said, his voice dropping to a dangerous rumble. "You speak of the woman prophesied to save our kind. Show proper respect or face the consequences." "Prophesied by mad seers and desperate hopes," Thorn snarled. "I call for a formal challenge to your leadership. Your judgment has been compromised by lust for this human creature." The crowd shifted restlessly, tension ratcheting higher with each exchanged word. Evelyn found herself gripping the windowsill hard enough to leave marks in the wood, her heart pounding as she watched the confrontation unfold below. "What happens if he challenges Darius?" she asked Helena, dreading the answer. "Single combat to determine leadership of the pack," Helena replied, her face grave. "Winner takes all, including authority over your fate." The implications were staggering. If Darius lost, she would be at the mercy of someone who clearly viewed her as a threat to be eliminated. If he won, The victory would come at the cost of violence and division within the pack, making her position even more precarious. "I accept your challenge," Darius said, his voice carrying across the courtyard with finality. "But I choose the time and terms. 3 days hence at the new moon, we settle this matter permanently." Thorn's smile was cold and predatory. "I accept. And when I claim leadership, the first order of business will be removing this contamination from our sacred halls." As the crowd began to disperse, Evelyn sank into the nearest chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she'd witnessed. In less than 24 hours, she'd learned she was part of a supernatural world, discovered she carried the blood of shapeshifters, been told she was destined to bear the children of a pack leader, and now watched as two powerful beings prepared to fight over her fate as if she were property to be claimed by the victor. "Why is he doing this?" she asked Helena. "Why is Darius risking his leadership for someone he barely knows?" Helena studied her with those ancient knowing eyes. "Perhaps because he sees something in you that even you don't recognize yet. Or perhaps because he understands that sometimes the greatest risks yield the greatest rewards. And if he loses, then you'll learn exactly what I meant when I said there are fates worse than being cherished and protected," Helena replied grimly. "Thorn views you as an abomination, a dilution of pure bloodlines that threatens the very foundation of our society. He won't be content with simply sending you away." The threat hung in the air between them, like a blade. Evelyn understood now that her choices weren't between freedom and captivity, but between different forms of captivity, some infinitely worse than others. Darius offered her a cage made of silk and gold, respect and protection. Thorn offered only elimination. "I need to see him," she said suddenly, surprising herself with the decision. "I need to speak with Darius before this challenge takes place." "That can be arranged," Helena said carefully. "But be warned, child. He's not the same man in private that he appears to be in public. Alpha authority requires a certain distance, a careful balance between strength and approachability. Don't mistake his public persona for the whole truth of who he is." "What do you mean?" "I mean that the man you met this morning carries burdens you can't imagine, losses that would have broken lesser beings. His strength comes at a cost, and sometimes that cost is the ability to show vulnerability to anyone." The revelation added another layer of complexity to her situation. She'd seen Darius as her captor, her oppressor, the architect of her imprisonment. But if Helena was right, he might be as trapped by circumstances and duty as she was, bound by expectations and traditions that left little room for personal desires or fears. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Marcus entered at Helena's invitation, his expression grim and his posture suggesting urgent news. "Alpha Darius requests the honor of Evelyn's presence in his private study," he said formally, though his eyes held warning. "There are matters that require immediate discussion." "What kind of matters?" Evelyn asked, though she suspected she already knew. "The kind that determine whether you live through the week," Marcus replied bluntly. "Thorn isn't the only one questioning your place here. Others are beginning to voice concerns, and some of those concerns involve more permanent solutions to the problem you represent." The casual way he spoke of her potential murder sent chills down her spine. She'd known her position was precarious, but she hadn't realized how precarious until now. The beautiful sanctuary Darius had created around her was under siege from within, and she was the unwitting cause of fractures that threatened to tear the pack apart. "Take me to him," she said, rising from her chair with newfound determination. "If I'm going to die for someone else's political machinations, I at least want to understand why." As they left the room, Helena's words followed her like a warning. "Remember, child, in our world, survival often depends on understanding the difference between allies and enemies. Sometimes the line between them is thinner than you might expect." The corridors they walked through were different from the path she'd traveled that morning, lined with portraits of stern-faced individuals whose eyes seemed to track their movement. These were the previous leaders of the pack, Helena explained quietly. Generations of alphas who had guided their people through centuries of hidden existence. Will Darius's portrait hang here someday? Evelyn asked, studying a particularly fierce-looking woman whose golden eyes reminded her strongly of her current captor. That depends, Marcus replied grimly, on whether he survives the next 3 days, and whether you prove to be worth the risk he's taking by protecting you. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders like a cloak made of lead. Somewhere in the span of a single day, she'd gone from victim to catalyst, from prisoner to the unwitting center of a political storm that could reshape an entire supernatural society. As they approached the heavy oak doors that led to Darius's private study, Evelyn realized that the conversation waiting for her on the other side would likely determine not just her fate, but the fate of everyone in the pack. The scared, confused woman who had awakened that morning was gone, replaced by someone who understood that survival in this world required strength, cunning, and the willingness to fight for every scrap of agency she could claim. The battle for her future was about to begin in earnest, and for the first time since arriving in this strange new reality, she felt ready to fight back. The heavy oak doors opened to reveal a study that felt more like a war room than a place of scholarly contemplation. Maps covered every available wall surface, marked with symbols she didn't recognize and connected by colored threads that suggested complex relationships between territories. Books lay open on every surface, their pages filled with dense text in languages that looked ancient and powerful. But it was the man standing behind the massive desk who commanded her complete attention. Darius had shed the composed mask he'd worn that morning, revealing exhaustion that carved deep lines around his golden eyes and tension that radiated from every inch of his powerful frame. His dark hair was disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and his shirt was rolled up at the sleeves, exposing forearms marked with intricate tattoos that seemed to move in the flickering candlelight. "Evelyn," he said, his voice rougher than she remembered. "Thank you for coming. Please sit." She remained standing, using the physical advantage to study him more carefully. This wasn't the controlled alpha who had commanded her room that morning, but a man under siege, fighting battles on multiple fronts while trying to appear invulnerable to his enemies. "Helena told me about the prophecy," she said without preamble. "About your people facing extinction. Is it true?" "Every word," he replied, moving around the desk to lean against its edge. The position put him closer to her, close enough that she could smell his scent, cedar and moonlight, and something indefinably masculine that made her newly awakened senses respond in ways she didn't want to acknowledge. "Then why is Thorn opposing this so violently? If I can help save your species, why would anyone object?" Darius's smile was bitter and sharp-edged. "Because some people would rather die pure than live tainted. Thorn believes that mixing bloodlines, even ancient ones like yours, will corrupt what we are. He thinks extinction with honor is preferable to survival through compromise. And you disagree. I think survival is the only honor that matters," he said firmly. "I've watched too many of our children die young, seen too many pregnancies fail, buried too many of our elders without leaving strong heirs behind. If your blood can change that, then tradition can go to hell." The passion in his voice surprised her, revealing depths of feeling she hadn't expected. This wasn't just political calculation or species preservation. This was personal for him in ways that went beyond leadership responsibility. "You've lost someone," she said quietly, the words coming out more as statement than question. His golden eyes flashed with pain so quickly she almost missed it. "My mate," he said simply. "Elena. She died trying to carry my child 5 years ago. The pregnancy complications that kill our females claimed her before she could even transform to try to save herself." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on her own situation, her own fears and anger, that she hadn't considered what personal tragedies might have shaped the man who held her fate in his hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered, meaning it completely. So am I, he replied, pushing away from the desk to pace toward the window overlooking the courtyard, where his authority had been publicly challenged hours earlier. Sorry that she died, sorry that I couldn't save her, and sorry that my grief has made me desperate enough to risk everything on a prophecy and a woman who looks at me like I'm her jailer. Aren't you? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Darius turned from the window, his expression unreadable. That depends entirely on how you choose to see this situation. I could be your jailer, your protector, your partner, or your enemy. The role I play is as much your choice as mine. My choice? Evelyn laughed, but there was no humor in it. I didn't choose to be brought here. I didn't choose to lose my memories or discover I have supernatural blood. I didn't choose to become the center of your political crisis or the reason you're risking your life in single combat. No, he agreed, moving closer until she could see the gold flecks in his extraordinary eyes. But you can choose what happens next. You can choose to fight me every step of the way, making this hell for both of us. You can choose to work with me to find a path that preserves both your dignity and my people's future. Or you can choose to let Thorn win and see what mercy he shows a woman he considers an abomination. The ultimatum was delivered gently, but it was still an ultimatum. Choose the devil you know, or face the one you don't, with no option to walk away from the situation entirely. What would working with you look like? She asked carefully. Partnership, he said immediately. Real partnership. Not the breeding program arrangement others might prefer. You would have voice in all decisions affecting our people's future, input into how our children are raised, authority over your own body and choices. In exchange for giving us a chance. Not a guarantee, not a promise you can't keep, just a genuine effort to see if we can build something together that serves both your needs and ours. She studied his face, looking for deception or manipulation, but found only exhaustion and desperate hope. This was a man at the end of his rope, fighting for the survival of everything he held dear while trying to honor the humanity of the woman he needed to save it all. And if we can't, if this partnership doesn't work, then we find another way, he said simply. I won't force you to bear children you don't want or live a life that makes you miserable, but I need you to try, Evelyn. I need you to give this a real chance. Before she could respond, a sharp knock interrupted them. Marcus entered without waiting for permission, his face grim with urgent news. Alpha, we have a problem. Scouts report movement on the eastern border. 3 vehicles, high-end, moving with purpose toward our territory. Darius went rigid, every line of his body shifting from exhausted vulnerability to lethal readiness. Who? Unknown, but the timing isn't coincidental. Someone knows about our guest. The implications crashed over Evelyn like ice water. Whatever sanctuary this place represented was about to be tested by outside forces who might have their own plans for a woman with her unique heritage. How long do we have? Darius asked, already moving toward a weapons cabinet she hadn't noticed before. 20 minutes, maybe less. Get everyone to defensive positions, full alert, but no one shifts unless I give the order. We don't want to reveal our full capabilities until we know what we're dealing with. As Marcus hurried away to carry out orders, Darius turned back to Evelyn with an expression that combined apology and determination in equal measure. I'm sorry, he said, pulling weapons from the cabinet with practiced efficiency. I'd hoped we'd have more time for you to adjust before facing external threats. Who do you think they are? She asked, surprised by how calm her voice sounded despite the fear coursing through her veins. Could be government agents who've finally connected enough dots to find us. Could be rival packs looking to claim you for themselves. Could be something worse. He handed her a silver knife that hummed with power in her palm. Whatever happens, stay close to me. Don't let anyone separate us. The knife felt surprisingly natural in her grip, as if her awakening wolf instincts were already guiding her towards survival behaviors she'd never learned. Another sign that Helena had been right about her transformation accelerating. "Darius," she said as he moved toward the door, "about your offer." He paused, hope flickering in his golden eyes. "I'll try," she said simply. "Not because I don't have other choices, but because I think you might actually mean what you're saying about partnership." The smile that crossed his face was brilliant and genuine, transforming his harsh features into something that took her breath away. "Thank you," he said softly. "That's all I can ask for." The sound of vehicles approaching broke the moment, their engines growing louder as they navigated the winding road that led to the pack's hidden sanctuary. Through the window, Evelyn could see pack members taking positions with military precision, their movements coordinated by years of training for exactly this kind of situation. "Stay behind me," Darius commanded, his voice shifting into the authoritative tone of an alpha preparing for battle. "And trust your instincts. Your wolf is waking up, and she'll know friend from foe better than your human mind can process." They moved through corridors that had been transformed from comfortable living spaces into defensive positions. Pack members nodded respectfully to Darius as they passed, but their eyes kept returning to Evelyn with expressions that ranged from protective concern to barely concealed suspicion. She was simultaneously the most valuable person in the building and its greatest liability. The main entrance hall had been cleared of furniture and decorations, creating an open space that favored defenders over attackers. Helena stood near the massive front doors, her silver hair pulled back severely and her ancient eyes blazing with power that made the air around her shimmer. Other pack members flanked the entrances and covered the windows, their positions chosen with tactical precision. The vehicles outside came to a stop, with the synchronization of a military unit. Car doors slammed in rapid succession, followed by the sound of boots on gravel. Whoever these people were, they weren't trying to be subtle or diplomatic. "Alpha Blackthorn," a voice called from outside, amplified by some kind of electronic device. "We know you're harboring property that belongs to another pack. Send out the woman, and we'll consider this a minor territorial dispute rather than an act of war." Darius's jaw tightened, his hand moving instinctively to the weapon at his side. "Property," he repeated, his voice deadly quiet. "They think your property to be claimed and traded." "How is that different from what you thought?" Evelyn asked, though without the venom she might have put into the words that morning. "Because I was offering you partnership with respect," he replied grimly. "They're offering you slavery with brutality." The voice outside continued, patience wearing thin. "You have 60 seconds to comply, Blackthorn. After that, we take her by force and consider you an obstacle to be removed permanently." "Counter-offer," Darius called back, his voice carrying clearly through the doors and windows. "Leave my territory immediately, and I won't hunt you down and tear your throats out for threatening what's mine." The possessive pronoun sent a strange thrill through Evelyn's awakening wolf, even as her human mind protested the implications. She was beginning to understand that the line between protection and possession was often blurred in this supernatural world, and that sometimes being claimed by the right person was the only alternative to being claimed by the wrong ones. 30 seconds, the voice warned. Darius looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each of his pack members in turn. These people trusted him with their lives, followed his orders without question, and stood ready to die, defending what he considered important. The weight of that responsibility was visible in every line of his face. "Whatever happens," he said quietly to Evelyn, "remember that you have choices. If something happens to me, Helena has instructions to help you reach safety. Don't let grief or guilt trap you in a situation that dishonors your freedom." Before she could respond, the sound of weapons being readied outside made further conversation impossible. The 60 seconds were up, and the moment of truth had arrived. "Time's up, Blackthorn," the voice announced. "We're coming in." The attack began with the subtle wrongness of magic being used as a weapon. The air in the entry hall suddenly felt thick and oppressive, making breathing difficult and movement sluggish. "Sleep magic," Helena hissed, her hands already weaving counterspells that pushed back against the encroaching drowsiness. But even as the magical assault intensified, Evelyn felt something stirring deep inside her chest. Her wolf, still mostly dormant, was responding to the threat with instincts that bypassed conscious thought entirely. Power flowed through her veins like liquid fire, burning away the artificial fatigue and sharpening her senses to supernatural clarity. Without warning, she could smell the emotions of their attackers through the walls: arrogance, greed, and a casual cruelty that made her newly awakened wolf snarl with protective fury. These weren't people who would show mercy or honor any agreements they made. They were predators in the worst sense, and they saw her as nothing more than a prize to be claimed. "Darius," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos building around them, "I need you to know something before this goes any further." He turned to her, golden eyes blazing with power and determination. "I choose you," she said simply. "Not because I don't have other options, but because you're the only one who's offered me partnership instead of ownership. Whatever happens next, I want you to know that I'm fighting beside you, not just hiding behind you." The smile that crossed his face was fierce and proud and completely devastating. "Then let's show them what partnership looks like," he said, drawing his weapon as the front doors exploded inward. The battle for her freedom, her future, and her right to choose her own destiny was about to begin. And for the first time since awakening in this strange new world, Evelyn felt ready to fight for something instead of simply fighting against it.